Find true love with the Geek Legion of Doom.
Oliver Cox writes and directs Lure. And how to describe this movie? It is kind of like Saw or Hostel mixed with a kind of dating element. So what's the story? Well, 6 young men in their 20s are lured to a large mansion in the middle of a forest by a young woman. And she is kind of trying to find a suitable mate. And this has apparently been going on for generations. And she's got these 6 guys kind of held hostage, tied up, and goes through a series of challenges where she eliminates the losers in hope of finding a winner to therefore go into the next generation, shall we say. What will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So let's discuss what works in this movie's favour. So this is a very low budget British movie. Smartly, they've kind of used limited locations to kind of maximise their budget. The majority of the action takes place in really kind of 2 locations. This kind of room where we initially meet all of our male contestants, this sort of table, and they're kind of tied up and things. And then we have like a kind of basement area in the kind of the same house. There's a couple of external shots and things, but for the majority of the screen time, this is where the action takes place. So it's limited in regards to scope, but I think that maximises what clearly is a very low budget movie, so it's not trying to overextend itself. And I think sort of singular location movies can work if the premise is strong and the kind of the writing is strong. And I think the premise is fairly kind of an interesting one here. I think the modern dating phenomena, if we can call it that, certainly is an interesting place at the moment, especially for young people, where, you know, things like technology is kind of affecting, and kind of the society is changing kind of dating patterns and things like this. And also where we have the influence of external factors like social media giving you this kind of feeling you have to kind of be a certain status and stuff, and that's kind of incorporated into this. So I sort of found that an interesting idea here, and it's also interesting having really female villains, because what it appears in the movie, there are generations of women who have lured men to basically become subservient. And we see an example where there is a guy who is kind of on the side of the captor, so to speak, but he appears to be subservient and really more of a slave than anything, and he's got like a sort of electrodes attached to him if he's, you know, a naughty boy and gets kind of zapped and stuff. So it looks like the way they've kind of framed it is that this kind of has been going on for sort of generations and stuff. So it's quite sort of delicious to see these genuinely kind of quite wicked female villains, and you know, there's no sort of redemption arc. I think sometimes when you have like with a female villain, quite often they'll have the need to try and redeem them or give them justification. Here, none of that. They're just baddies. So I quite like that. But there's also a degree of, you know, of sexiness as well, and the family appears to be very wealthy, kind of a little bit like this is what the kind of the 1% can do, a little bit like, you know, Hostel and things like this. So I actually kind of found that the premise and the setup pretty strong. And I would also say our kind of female lead, this young woman who is really trying to choose her mate, I've got to say I think she does a deliciously evil performance. I really could have quite thought she was you know, had a lot of charisma in her performance. It's a low budget movie and the acting is a little mixed overall, I would say, but certainly she is, I think, does a pretty good job, as do a couple of the other kind of the characters as well. But yeah, she could have definitely kind of stands out. The movie actually has some quite wince-inducing scenes in it. Now, the movie isn't overtly graphic. It's not like a gory movie where you're seeing lots of explicit blood and guts on screen. But there is a scene towards the middle of the movie where the remaining contestants are basically forced to mutilate themselves, each one a different kind of body part, shall we say. And although it isn't particularly graphic on screen, I think it's done in a way that actually makes you feel a little bit wincing and stuff. So I thought that was quite good, the way that the movie, without really being particularly explicit on screen, is able to still get across that sort of visceral uncomfortableness and kind of pain that is being experienced. And we do see a little bit of gore, don't get me wrong, but it's not, I wouldn't say, like a real particularly kind of gory movie in any sort of way. The movie does kind of point to a larger world as the film goes on. It tries to broaden its kind of horizons a little bit, also adding a little bit of a twist to the proceedings. So I think the story here is reasonable. And I say reasonable rather than good for reasons I'll explain in just a minute. But, you know, there's a reasonable basic premise to this. And it's, you know, it's kind of relatively well shot. I think it's a little bit dark once or twice, but for the most part I thought it was kind of shot pretty well. It's, you know, that location seems like it's this stately manor in the middle of nowhere, and you kind of get the idea that they're kind of somewhat cut off and things like that. So the production is good on some aspects, but let's talk about what doesn't work, and let's stay with the production value. As I mentioned, there are a little bit of kind of underlit scenes here and there, not loads, but just a couple here and there. The main issue I have, the technical elements, is the sound mixing. So the sound mixing to me is probably the worst technical element, because the movie, a lot of the movie's dialogue is relatively softly spoken. It's not shouty, it's quite just normal level, but it has this kind of music that kind of plays over a lot of the dialogue, and as such it drowns out much of the actual dialogue. So when we're having characters that are interacting with speaking scenes and it's playing this kind of music, and then I just didn't understand what that was saying. The music needed to be kind of toned down a little bit, I think, because it just drowns out a lot of the dialogue. So that's the kind of the technical elements, and with a little bit of kind of sometimes being marginally underlit here and there. The acting, I think, is, for me at least, was generally, I think, fairly strong. There's one or two performances where I think aren't as quite as strong as the others, and maybe would stand out a little bit. But overall, I think the acting is for the most part good, outside of, I say maybe one or two actors here who I don't think are quite up to scratch. I think the main issue for me is the basic setup, easy to understand. But I think this movie really lacks context. Why are they doing this? I mean, what's preventing these women from going and meeting just guys normally? Why are they resorting to this? It's not really ever explored. It's just like, it's tradition. But why? It seems unnecessarily risky to have this. I mean, with, for example, Hostel, they're doing those reasons because they can't do it in real life. It's like, you know, they're paying to have the to do this anonymously, and they can kind of get their kink off. But here it's just meeting someone to mate. There's no reason why this couldn't be done just naturally. It doesn't really strike me as a sort of plausible reason without kind of any context, and there's not really any context. And also, I think, so what this woman does is that they have various contests to whittle down these guys. So I'm thinking, okay, well, how has she selected these guys to begin with? Because it's not really clear. For example, you would have thought if she's wanting the best genetic mate, that's what you would have presumed. But some of these people have been selected for like other reasons, like one's like a good gambler or something, or one's like a musician. So things that are learned rather than kind of genetic traits more than anything. So it's like, why are these people kind of chosen? And again, it's not really sort of ever really kind of expanded upon. Like one's like a great martial artist, and that's great, but that's learned behaviour rather than like a genetic trait. So anyone who has this amount of wealth could pretty much go into any kind of like speciality that they chose to. So it doesn't really, it struck me as a little bit weird. I can understand maybe if she's trying to get like a specific genetic outcome, but that's not what appears to be happening. And then we kind of go into these various tasks and they seem arbitrary. So, for example, one time they're playing blackjack and whoever loses basically gets killed. And thinking, well, that's, you know, that's somewhat down to kind of luck, to be honest with you. So there's no real reason, you know, it's, I mean, obviously if there's a certain amount of risk and tactical thinking, I suppose, but a lot of it is purely down to the cards that you are being dealt and stuff. And how is this going to help you whittle down your decisions? I mean, it makes for an interesting kind of game of blackjack for sure, with high stakes, but for the context of the story, it didn't really ever make sense. And also, as we kind of go further on in the movie, we're thinking, okay, so we're led to believe that this has been going on for ages, and it just seems like no one has ever seemed to have come looking for these guys. I mean, the cover story is that they've been invited to a party, okay? Now, in modern days, people have GPS on their phones, and it's not as if they've got to hide where they're going because it's some kind of like salacious thing that they're doing. They've been invited to a party. Surely they would, you know, there's the risk of people telling other people and stuff. So the whole setup, I think, is flawed. So although I think the premise is an interesting one, I just think it isn't as well thought through as really it could have been, or kind of like if you can look at its contemporary movies, again, it just doesn't really hold up under much kind of scrutiny. I would also say as the kind of the film progresses towards the final act of the movie, or it adds like a little bit of a twist and an extra element, that wasn't as well handled as I would have liked either. Overall, though, I think the basic premise, at the very least, is kind of interesting, and you know, we've got quite a fantastic female villain in this, and as such, I don't think it's necessarily a bad film. It's worth a watch if you don't mind the low budget one. I will give it a 5 out of 10. What were your thoughts if you've seen it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to you next time.
Geek Legion of Doom is so romantic.